and welcome back to our last day of talking about common mistakes that novice writers make. Today we're going to talk about general writing mistakes and problems with prose. The biggest thing that novice writers are guilty of is trying too hard. They might feel like their plain everyday way of talking or writing isn't good enough, isn't clever enough, or isn't literary enough. And so they will try to be something that they're not. It almost always shows to the reader, and it makes the writer look like an amateur, like they don't know what they're doing, that they're trying too hard, and they don't even know who they are as a writer. A lack of clear and concise prose will turn off all but the hardiest of readers. Writing styles, much like language, evolve over time. The days of big words and flouncy poetic prose went out with Dickens. And while it's nice to go back and read them sometimes, they're very much of their time and they are not to modern tastes. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with this style of writing. It has its place and can still be used today, but it's a skill that takes practice and more practice to get it right. Often, if you're writing a book in the style of someone else, you can market it as such, then that's fine. If you're marketing a book written in the style of Dickens, or in the style of Arthur Conan Doyle, or something, or in the style of Shakespeare if you want to, if you're marketing it as that, then that is fine. Go for it, because your readers are going to expect this kind of writing and this kind of prose. Your readers will know exactly what they're buying. But if it's for a modern contemporary novel, it really doesn't work at all. Not matching your writing style to the type of book that you're writing is another problem. For example, if you had a rather old-fashioned kind of style to you, with very proper sentence construction and a love of big words, you might be better suited to a historical novel where it's going to work better. Older writers who attended school in a different era tend to find that this works quite well for them. So a historical novel doesn't have to be set hundreds of years ago. It just has to be of a time that's not now. Okay, so say you grew up in the 60s and were taught in those days and still have those kind of speech patterns you're writing, then maybe think about doing a novel set during that time period where your language and your style will be able to flow and work to its full potential. If you have a more modern style, then set your novel in modern times that reflect it. It would really, really jar with your readers if you use modern language in a novel set in, say, like the 1940s, for example. On the subject of historicals, let me add in a teeny tiny little warning about another problem that was mentioned to me by a fellow writer, and that is lack of research. Amateur writers often get too caught up in the story, and they have an overly romanticised view of the time period that they're writing about. I'm a member of a few active writing forums and groups online, and one observation that someone made in one was how they were having to rewrite almost all of their novel because their editor had said that they had an overly romantic TV drama style descriptions. And because of this, they then had learned that the streets of 1850s New Orleans would have been covered in horse shit as well as human waste. People would be pissing on the street without a care in the world. It was filthy, it stank, and it was not really a nice place to be. She didn't know that before. I think she was making it something out of Gone with the Wind or whatever. Nah. Trying to write a book when all you know about the area or the time period has come from movies or TV shows will scream novice, and it's going to showcase your lack of effort. Research is your friend. This doesn't just mean the physical descriptions of the area itself, but this also includes the dialogue that would have been used, the accents, the slang words that were used, the legal system of the time, how the country worked. Basically, researching all aspects of your book, not just the obvious ones. Another prose problem would be making your writing overly complex. Again, this is related to the type of book that you're writing. Going into massive details about how a computer works and how they're built is fine if you're writing an article for a computer magazine, but not in a novel. God's forbid if it was in a short story. Just ugh. Readers will have a hard time following. They'll likely skip ahead or just give up completely on reading your story. It's the same with science or physics. Keep things as basic as you can while still giving the information that is needed. don't treat your reader like they're stupid and have to be spoon-fed the ABC, but also keep large, complicated scientific explanations in their place, such as magazines, academic journals, and dissertations. Choppy prose is another example of amateurish writing. Choppy prose can make your writing feel disjointed, like it lacks flow, because it does, and construction. While this can work in small doses for an action scene or a scary scene, too much will make it feel like a race. It'll exhaust your reader and it makes it harder to read. There's a number of culprits that result in choppy prose, but the most common two would be fragmented or run-on sentences. A run-on writing is when two or more scene points are joined without proper conjunction, like the use of and, but, or type words, or without punctuation. It's almost a hurried pace, and it isn't always the pace that you're trying to create. For example, Mona arrived at the bank only 3 minutes late. She ran up the steps, she banged on the door, screamed at the people inside. She had to get inside to talk to them. Fragmented writing seems incomplete, lacking real purpose, flow, or structure. It can make a writer look uneducated. It can read in a really confusing way, and it can give an image that you don't want. For example, Mona gave up and stopped, cried. What would happen now? Ruined. All was ruined. She sat down on the steps because her legs gave out. Maybe someone would help her. The next bank, take pity on her. I tried really hard to actually emphasise the full stops and the fragmentation of that actual piece of writing. If it doesn't come out very well, or you couldn't really understand it, to actually see what I was meaning with that, I do upload all of these YouTube videos, transcripts, onto my blog on Tumblr, so you might want to go have a little peeky over. And that was actually hard for me to write because it went against everything I know as a writer. But you'll be surprised how often I see it while beta reading in online stories or sometimes even in independently published books. So you saw how badly those examples read, but don't despair, do not give up, because they can be easily fixed with a little bit of practice and work. Separate your run-on sentences with correct clauses or into sentences of their own, adding more details when needed. Smooth out your fragmented writing with proper punctuation and then build them into full sentences. Here's an example on how to fix some of the structural problems with our little bits that we just had there. Mona missed the bank by 3 minutes, finding the doors locked. Desperate, she banged on the door, calling to the people inside to let her in. She needed to talk to them, to fix it. They ignored her, deaf to her yells. Giving up, she stopped, bursting into tears as the reality of the situation hit home. Ruined. It was all ruined. Her legs felt wobbly, incapable of holding her up, and she sat down heavily on the stairs before she fell. Maybe someone would help her. Maybe another bank would take pity on her. She couldn't give up now. That flows so much better. It explains the situation in brief detail, and it also shows her mood, but also her determination to keep going. Check your word choices. Nothing screams amateur more than writing the wrong word or spelling for that word. Here's a brief example. I'll give you a moment to read it. Using the wrong word choice can make you look uneducated, like you're trying too hard, using words you don't understand in an effort to look clever. But in fact, it actually has the opposite effect. If you're using a word that has more than one meaning, check its definition, check the spelling, and make sure you're using it in the correct way. For example, bare and bare. One, spelt B-A-R-E, means that something is naked, not covered, to bear all, to be bare, or that something is basic, the bare essentials, without decoration or fancy features. Bear, spelt B-E-A-R, also has more than one meaning. It means a bear as in the animal that lives in the woods and likes to steal picnic baskets. Other meanings include not being able to bear something. It's unbearable, I cannot bear it. You can also bear something, as in he was bearing a tray of snacks. The same goes for any words that you do not use or hear in everyday conversation. Check them, because it's so easy to misunderstand the meaning of a word or to misspell it to turn it into something that it shouldn't be. If you're wanting to use a word that you've never checked before, check it. I'm going to be brutally honest here, a 30-second Google could be the difference between looking educated or stupid. Straight up. So many people think that they know the meaning of a word only to confuse it with another that sounds very similar. For example, synonym buns or cinnamon buns. Most definitely not the same thing. And yes, I've seen this on the internet, it is a real thing. Another thing is to always check is a common saying. By that I mean when someone thinks that they know what a common saying is, but they've actually misheard it themselves and now they just keep saying it wrong. One example I saw of this is someone that said that they wished everyone could just bury the hatchet. Now, I don't know who Barry is, or why he is a hatchet, or what they're trying to do with him, but it didn't make sense. All of these little slip-ups are surefire ways to making yourself look bad when they turn up in your writing work. If I read a comment or a post by someone that uses the wrong words when they're trying to look clever, usually when someone is ranting or trying to make an offensive point, I will notice it. I can't help it. And, much as I would love to say that I don't judge them, let's be real here. I do. I judge a lot. Because I believe in education and in continuing to educate yourself, to better yourself for as long as you have left on this planet. Okay? By not looking up the correct words, using tools that you have like spell checker, or even bothering to use the right spelling for a word, well, that's just laziness in my eyes. Harsh, but true. I can't take someone seriously if they're trying to make a point when they write like that. But if it shows up in a novel, it would literally make me stop. I would give up on that book. I would give up reading. If you want to be taken seriously with your writing, you have to start taking it seriously yourself. And that means lots of time and effort. Bad use of punctuation, or complete lack of it, is also something that many will judge you on. It can throw off the whole rhythm and flow of your writing. I'm not going to go deep into this as I'm planning on doing a video on the subject, but what I will say now as a quick tip is to either read your work out loud, or better yet, get a reading app to do it for you if you have trouble with knowing how your punctuation works within your story. The difference between a full stop and a comma is huge, but many people treat them as if they're the same thing, almost like they're interchangeable, but the misuse of them will change the whole structure, pace and rhythm of your sentence. Repetitive words is another thing that novice writers may do. Now, I'm not saying that you need to pull a Joey and use a thesaurus for every single word that you use, but you can mix it up a little bit. If you're describing something and you need to make the point more than once, then try to find a different descriptive word to use. I've got a personal rule of never using the same descriptive word twice for the same thing in the same paragraph. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you can't branch out with things without looking like you're trying too hard. And some things are not actually important enough to bother doing it with. A book is a book. So technically you could say it's a novel, an opus, a tome, a volume, a paperback, etc. They all mean the same thing. but it would get pretty ridiculous if you tried to use them all. So in this case, I would just describe the book itself. I would say, a paperback romance sat on the bedside table, and then just refer to it as the book after that. So she picked up the book, studying the cover, she flicked through the book, starting to read at random, she threw the book at his head. It's an example of keeping things simple. When not to use repetitive words would be when describing something super important, like say a baby. You could use newborn, the baby, his son, her child, the infant. Picture the scene, okay? There's just been a traumatic birth and now the baby is safely here and it's the aftermath, or even during the birth itself. Just saying the baby all the time would become boring and repetitive. If something is important, it needs to be kept at the forefront of the action, and that means that it needs more than one descriptive word, otherwise it's going to start blending into the background of the story. Another example of this would be action words or doing words, if you prefer to call them that. Here's an example of one descriptive word getting overused and boring. The crystals were placed in a circle, their pattern very specific, with a candle placed in the centre. Next she took out a shell and placed that in the west of the circle. Then came an incense cone which she placed in the east. Placed, placed, placed. All the same descriptive word. Other words could and probably should be used in that, which keeps the writing feeling fresh. So for example, the crystals were arranged in a circle, their pattern looking to be very specific. A candle was then placed in the centre. That's our first and only placed. Next, she took out a shell, laying it carefully in the west of the circle, and an incense cone in the east. Different words make the writing more interesting. Another problem, which I'll just touch on, as I did a bit about this in previous videos and I plan on doing more in-depth talk on them in the future, is point of view problem, i.e. first, second or third person writing. Books are almost always in either first person or third person point of view. Second is mostly ignored and unused. Personally, I hate that point of view. I hate writing it, I hate reading it. I find it creepy and weird and just uncomfortable and awkward to read. But again, that's just my opinion. Everything in these videos is just my opinion and things that I've found out about writing over time and with effort and just trial and error really. But you don't have to listen to them, you don't have to agree with them all, just cherry pick the bits you like and fuck off the rest. Most novice writers fall into writing first person because they find it easier to relate to the character and to tell the story, but this can come with problems. It could be harder to create a more complex storyline as you are very limited to what information you can give and what you can show to the reader due to how much your character will actually know, see or experience. So you'll often end up in the realm of telling instead of showing as a way of explaining, which isn't great. Another problem could be lack of character voice, as you might not have time to develop your author's voice and style, therefore all your characters will run the risk of sounding the same. Lastly, your characters can come off as whining, self-centred and a little bit dumb, as it's all too easy to fall into the trap of too much information feeding. As always, everything with writing takes time and practice. Read lots of tips, keep watching videos like this and keep writing. Upcoming videos are going to include dialogue, exploring various points of views in depth, the pros and cons of them, how to edit your work, and more talk on romance novels. So I hope you do pop back and stick around for those. Thank you for being on this little journey with me this past week. And until we meet again, blessed be and happy writing.